It is a Locked On crossover with Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Huskies. My name is Zach Seyko, host of Locked On Nittany Lions, and he is Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place just $5, a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Intel on both sides for Penn State versus Washington. Is Penn State going to spiral because they lost the biggest game on the schedule? Nothing out of the ordinary here, Roman, but Washington, I feel like, is starting to peak a little bit. This is a team that was runner-up a season ago, but is clearly not the same team with all of the missing players. Guys moved on, coach leaves, but Jedd Fisch, great replacement, and the team had to build through the transfer portal. So I've always kind of been concerned about this game from Penn State's point of view, because I thought if you catch Washington at the wrong time, they might be peaking. They might be able to figure it out, because these are a lot of talented players that just haven't played a lot of football together.
Yeah, Zach, you're absolutely right. That's one of the first things that we just came from our press conference with Jedd Fisch. Actually, one of the first things he said was, "I feel this was the best game we played in all three phases. Washington, the offense, the defense, special teams. Washington looked like they were starting to click." And it took a lot longer than, especially I thought it was going to take, where we saw them look really good early and then ride this really weird wave where it was just win, loss. And then they lost two in a row with Iowa and Indiana. And now they're sitting here at 5-4. So I'm really curious to see what this game is going to look like. Cause you talk about, catching Washington at the wrong time and being a little nervous about what that might look like. I've been concerned about this game all year, where it's the whiteout, it's a cross-country flight. Washington has not won a game not even on the road, just away from Husky Stadium. They had a neutral site game 5 miles away, and they couldn't pull that off at Lumen Field. So one thing that I just, obviously, first and foremost, when I look at this game is the whiteout, the energy, the environment that is going to be in that stadium, especially because, we had to sit and wait until the middle of the Husky game when they told us in the press box, hey, it is going to be a night game. So that was nice to hear. But that's always been my number one concern in this game for all the Husky fans that listen to this. Can you just talk a little bit about what that atmosphere is like?
I'm curious to see how the whiteout holds up this time around, seeing that it is parallel to this game against Ohio State, where all the juice, all the energy went into that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was kind of one of the storylines, getting it to it earlier. The whiteout atmosphere is going to be incredible. It is a little later in the season, so I wonder how big the crowd is going to be, but tickets are still at a premium. It's still one of the games that's been circled by just neutral college football fans. So you're going to get a packed Beaver Stadium, probably not the record-setting 111,000 that was against Ohio State, but it certainly will be. It'll be one of the best environments, and Washington fans will be the ones that are in attendance will be treated to that. And Peacock, the game that is being streamed on exclusively, is going to have an IMAX feature for this as well to really. So I think that is unique. I do like that about that. But I really, Washington. When I look at Washington, I don't want people to look past this team, and that's kind of and I've always said that preseason, quarter of the way through the season, Roman, because when you look at the power rankings from Pro Football Focus, and that's what I was trying to look up here to make sure I had this correct, Washington, for a team that is 5-4, and a close win against USC at home, but it's still a quality win. You had to turn the Trojans there away at the end. Washington is number 16 according to the analytics, so they're unranked in this, but in the AP, but PFF says they're the 16th best team in the country. Penn State, number 6. That's how close these two teams are when you look past all of the other data. This team is talented, and it should concern Penn State fans that this is going to be a tougher matchup than many will believe.
So, Zach, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is the biggest thing with this team, where it is really talented, and the future does look really bright. There are a lot of really talented young guys on this roster. But at the same point, it's just been some of these little mistakes, and self-inflicted mistakes a lot of the time, that have killed Washington. They had 16 penalties against Washington State. They had some more killer penalties against Rutgers, and you can look at every game, outside of probably the Iowa one where they just got straight up just run over by Caleb Johnson,
Right.
where you can just say, all right, a little thing here and a little thing there, and this game goes a lot differently. And that's something that I'm really excited about the future of the Jetfish program. And I look at that and I say, if you're able to fix these self-inflicted wounds, you've got a really, really talented football team. And a lot of that does look like a team that is in year one with new starters left and right, where it's weird to still be talking about that going into the 10th game of the season. But yeah, that's what it is. That's what this team is. None of these guys have played together, and it takes time to iron those things out and get everybody on the same page. But when I look at this Washington team, I see a really strong defense. I see a talented offense that's starting to work together. Will Rogers and Damon Williams, you're going to see two quarterbacks. I know we'll get into that a little bit later. But I see things in every area of the game where kick coverage is the one thing where I'm really concerned about at this point in time. So we'll get into that as well. But the more I look at this, the more I say this is a talented Washington team. And I see a really, really high ceiling, but you got to be a little careful. But Zach, on the other side of this, when because I got a chance to watch a lot of that Penn State Ohio State game. I've tried to watch Penn State whenever I could this season. And it just feels like the amount of injuries that have piled up, I don't know if that's necessarily what, was the dagger against Ohio State, but the more that I've watched this Penn State team, it feels like they've really started to pile up, and it's almost reaching a tipping point where the wheels could come off at a certain point. You can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Well, and that's the point of this opening conversation, is that Washington seems to be peaking at the right time, and if Penn State isn't careful, they can spiral, and this would be the game that they drop. I mean, it's not like Penn State is going from Ohio State to Purdue. You're going from a Washington team that is severely underrated, and you have the whiteout, you have a home game. If this was a trip across the country to Washington, I would be a little more concerned about this game. I would be very concerned about this game because it's a well-coached team, talented players, a strong defense, and we've seen that. I mean, Penn State went up against a top 5 across the board defense against Ohio State, and look how it turned out. Now, granted, that game was close. 20-13, 7-point game. Maybe it wasn't that close. No, it was close because Penn State had 2 opportunities to punch it inside the 5, and they couldn't convert. So kudos to Ohio State for making multiple goal line stands, but Penn State was right there. So to say that they aren't able to contend with some of the best teams in the country is wrong. But we also have to remember, Roman, these are student athletes. These are players that are very emotionally driven. College football, it's trending towards being more business-like, being more professional, but there's still an element of amateurism. There's an element of immaturity, and that's why you see college football teams, when they do lose the big one, NFL teams can be guilty of it too, but there's a lot more emotion in college football, which is why we have seen Penn State teams in particular drop that second unnecessary game and basically tank all the major expectations for the season. I would like to think this team is different, and there's a whole lot of history to say like, hey, be prepared for this. But Washington, I think, is one of the tougher teams that Penn State ideally would not want to face in this situation, but that's the schedule.
No, I really like where you're going with that, and it's interesting that these are all the things that have come up with this team, because that's been a Washington issue of years past, where it feels like there's always you get up for it, where we saw it last season. Where that's the first thing that popped into my head was, you get that big emotional victory over Oregon, the missed field goal at the very end of the game, and then all of a sudden you need a pick 6 in the final 2 minutes against a bad Arizona State team. So I think it's fun the way that one of the cool things that I personally love about conference realignment, this Big Ten, Pac-12, the way it's all come together is you get to see so many new environments, and obviously the whiteout is a huge part of this. But on top of that, it's some of the similarities of these big programs, because we had Jake Butt over on Locked On Huskies the other day, and one thing that he talked about with just Washington's program in general is this is one of the premier programs in college football, even though it doesn't look like it, even though it might not sound like it to a lot of fans. And that's something that I'm really excited to just kind of bring that energy and the tradition that Washington has into Penn State.
On the other side of this break, we'll talk more about this matchup, but we'll have Roman lead the way and get some more intel that I'm willing to share with him about Penn State. We'll talk about that and more on the other side of this break.
Hey, Locked On Huskies fans, it's time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we pulled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Microdeposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes that you love, ensuring that all the funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, we're supporting Carson Bruner. We just pitched in $100, and we'd love for you to join us. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show Carson the love and keep him connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets up your team for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code Locked On, and you're entered. Already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game.
And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. It's that convenient. It's that simple. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. And the lines are available for Penn State versus Washington. It is this upcoming Saturday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time kick. It's the whiteout. It's on Peacock, and Penn State is nearly a two touchdown favorite, minus 13.5 on the spread. Money line is minus 550. If you're betting the Huskies, there's some value, plus 400 on the money line for the Huskies. The total is set at 45.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them right now over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel.com.
Zach, I've got so many questions. I honestly don't even know where to start here. I think the first place for me, I'm really big in the draft world. I love the NFL draft. I love just following all sorts of that. And I think the number one player on the team personally, in terms of just talent, everything at the next level, is Abdul Carter. I love him. I'd love to get a little bit more intel with him, but I'd be remiss if I didn't start with Drew Allar. Because with Drew Allar, I see a guy who has played really well, shows all world potential. But it feels like the injuries and the inconsistencies have just really arisen at inopportune times, I feel is the best way to say that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Penn State really had them all pile up in that Wisconsin game, but it really started and ended with the injury to KJ Winston. KJ Winston, in terms of injuries, was the biggest loss that almost can't be described. KJ Winston allowed this team to do things and put players in better positions to succeed. And now the defense, you're not going to notice it immediately, but it looks completely different. And they're getting better week by week, Roman, just because players are getting used to their different roles, their different assignments. Younger players are having to step up in ways that they probably didn't think they would this season. And that was a veteran playmaker. And you mentioned Abdul Carter. Him and KJ Winston are 1A, 1B in terms of those players that have the biggest impact. Now, let me go to Drew Allar, as you've asked specifically, but that's kind of to combine it all together, to put Abdul Carter in perspective and the injuries. But Drew Allar has taken a step forward. Andy Kotelnicki's offense has helped him immensely, and he's still in a situation where he's doing a lot better. He's succeeding. However, the things that plagued this team a season ago showed up again against Ohio State. Are those problems as apparent? No, but they're still there. The wide receivers are slightly better. The offensive line, give or take, probably not the same as it was a season ago. The play calling's better, but unless you're calling a perfect game week in, week out, and then you factor in how good the competition is, that Ohio State is elite competition, elite teams will bring out your biggest flaws. Drew Allar has not been and never will be the biggest problem. Does he make mistakes from time to time? Absolutely. Everybody bears responsibility in a loss or a less than stellar performance. But Drew Allar, in that game against Ohio State, he could have thrown 3 or 4 interceptions. His receivers were blanketed 9 times out of 10. The offensive line was pretty good in pass protection, but when it came to run blocking, it was bad. So if anybody bared the brunt of the offensive line, it was the ground game, which helps complement the pass game. And Ohio State just had no respect for what the offensive line and the ground game were offering in terms of overall run scheming and everything. So that limited everything across the board. And then in turn, that's going to limit a Drew Allar. But when he's at his best, he is on. And he has taken a big step forward and has met the expectations that I think most people around Penn State that follow Penn State have had for him.
So that's all really interesting to me because when I look at what the strength of this Washington defense is, where I think the game is going to be won and lost on the other side, but Washington's defense has done a really good job when the offense has struggled keeping the Huskies in every single game this season. Where Washington has struggled is in the run defense, where we saw USC really be able to just grind away some yards. I talked about Caleb Johnson, what that looked like a couple of weeks ago. But when I look at what this Washington defense has struggled to do, it's been struggled to defend the run consistently. And part of that's been due to depth issues along the defensive line, where their best defensive tackle, Javon Parker, was lost for the season in the Rutgers game. But outside of that, we've just seen a defensive line that, again, looks like it's in its first year playing together. And it's a lot of guys who are taking large steps forward into bigger roles. And you see that all over the line where Zach Durfee, who's been Washington's, I want to say he's been their best edge rusher all season long. He hasn't played in nearly a month now where he's dealing with turf toe in both of his feet. So that's one thing where I'm curious to see what the run defense looks like if he's unable to go. But then on top of that, right now, I can say this now, reigning defensive player of the week in the Big Ten, Carson Bruner. I want to see if he can keep the hot streak going after 12 tackles, 2 picks last week, because where I say conversely, the run defense has been arguably the biggest weakness because it's just, ground out drives. We saw it at Indiana. We saw it at Iowa. We saw USC be able to do the same thing before they stepped up on the goal line. I think the pass defense is the greatest strength of this team, where Miller Moss threw for season high on him, 293, 294 yards, something like that. But he also threw 3 picks. And this Washington defense is second in the nation in passing yards allowed. I believe it's up to 142 after this past week. So this is a really strong secondary. So I think what Penn State is going to want to do might coincide with Washington's biggest strength if you do want to say, all right, we believe in Drew Allar, we want to win this game through the air, because especially with watching Tyler Warren, man, that guy's a tough cover. But I think that the biggest key for Penn State in this game might be to run the ball 35, 40 times.
And I think they would like to do that. Andy Kotelnicki is predisposed to be more of a ground and pound team. He's shown that at Buffalo. The record holder for most touchdowns in a single game happened under Andy Kotelnicki's direction. Yeah. Jarrett Patterson, when he had 8 touchdowns, that was Andy Kotelnicki's offense. And then Kansas's offense a season ago was top 10, top 15 in nearly every rushing category. Yards per carry, carries per game, right? All those statistics. So Andy Kotelnicki is more of a run-first type of coordinator. But if you're having a good defensive game plan where, hey, we trust that's the thing. If the wide receivers aren't going to be able to break open in single coverage, if Washington's secondary is much better than people are giving them credit for, then you can devote more resources, which is what Ohio State did. They devoted more resources because those cornerbacks and defensive backs in the back end, the 4 of them, were able to handle their assignments. So if Washington can do that, the run defense might actually be better on that given Saturday.
So that's exactly what Steve Belichick likes to do. He loves to play single coverage. His corners are big, long, athletic. They like to turn and run. They like to get physical. They like to play press man. So we're going to see a lot of that on the outside. And, with a USC receiving core that is, and to give them a lot of credit, they are really, really talented. So they won theirs. Washington won some, obviously. But that's where I'm really curious to see what's going to happen here, because you're right. Washington is going to try to sell out to stop the run and say, we trust these guys in one-on-one coverage all over the field. I'm just curious to see how that's going to work. And then on the other side of that, the biggest weakness of Washington's offense has been outside of third down. They've struggled in the red zone, even though they're 7 for 7 now in scoring points over the last 2 weeks, which is a huge improvement over the last 8 weeks of the season, I want to say. But I think the biggest weakness and where the struggles have come in for Washington's offense is up front, along the offensive line. They made a change at left tackle last week though. Maximus McCree, who had been starting there, dislocated his thumb, and so they went to redshirt freshman Kaylee Tafai. And he was really solid when in relief duty against Indiana. He was really solid when he had to come in, and he made his first career start against USC. So that's a guy who I had been terrified of this Abdul Carter matchup. I don't know where he's going to line up. Wherever he lines up, that's the guy who I'm just going to watch on every single play and just say, I don't know what this guy is going to do. And I think that having this offensive line, in which they made a couple other switches, they put sophomore Landon Hatchett, who's natural center. He's been playing right guard so far this season. Or excuse me, he's been playing left guard. He made his first start at right guard against USC. So a couple of the changes along the offensive line, Washington didn't allow any sacks this past week. And USC's pass rush isn't great. I wasn't super impressed with it.
No.
But at the same point, Washington had given up a lot of sacks. I think it was 10 or 11 over the previous 3 weeks. So seeing that kind of improvement was promising no matter the case. And I think Jed Fish said that we're going to see the same offensive line this week, at least to start the game. There's going to be some rotation to keep the guys fresh. There are a couple of guys that are dealing with some minor injuries. So as I look forward and I look at this game, I say with Washington's offense versus the Penn State defense, I just need to see Will Rogers get protected. And I think that the offense will be able to stay in rhythm because they've been able to pick up a lot of yards. Scoring points, that is a very different question.
I'm not so much worried about the pass game because I've just seen Will Rogers make mistakes that he shouldn't be making. And I think that has to do with timing and chemistry. I don't think that's a lack of talent. I've just seen Will Rogers miss. And that maybe that's also because there's pressure right in front of him, too, that he has to make an errant throw just to get it away. He's a veteran quarterback, though. So there's really little to nothing that Penn State defensively will scheme up that he hasn't seen over his time playing college football. He's smart, he's experienced, kind of the same thing with Will Howard. I didn't think that would be many things that Tom Allen could do to trip him up. The matchup of that I am curious to see, okay, how does Penn State stop Jonah Coleman? I know that Penn State's defense has been stout against the run across I guess the weakest link, if you will, is the secondary, but the secondary is still really good. They're in the top half of the country. The pass rush, pass defense, run defense, but the run defense, surprisingly enough, has been really, really top 10 in the country to this point, and it still stands. Jonah Coleman, though, and Washington, they can rely on that if they really need to, if the passing game is not working for Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even think it's a passing game thing necessarily, where they're going to rely on Jonah Coleman no matter what. That's just always been part of the game plan where if you look at his stat sheet and you just look at the pure amount of carries that he's gotten, you might not believe that. Where a big reason for that is as Jed Fish said after the USC game, he had been pretty banged up for a couple of weeks and, they weren't really letting on. That's why he only got 9 carries against Iowa, where part of that was the game script. But he had a lot of lower carry games. It was 11, 12, 13. And you'd say, oh, really? This is a team that wants to run the football and really wants to try to establish that? Yeah, they gave him 23 carries against USC. That's a career high for him. Took him for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. This is a guy who, if you make contact on him in the backfield, there's a good chance he's still going to find a way to churn forward and pick up a couple of yards. And he's a guy who also, at the same point, though, what I'm really curious to see is, to make a Penn State reference here, he almost has a little bit too much Saquon Barkley in him at times, and not in terms of the otherworldly athleticism, where he's an elite athlete, just not on the Saquon Barkley level, because I don't think anybody is there. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest things with Jonah is sometimes he tries to bounce runs outside when he doesn't need to, and he'll go down for a loss of 1 or loss of 2 when he can just get back to the line, maybe move forward for 1 yard. And that's something in this game that I'm really curious to see against a really good Penn State run defense, if he's going to change his philosophy a little bit and just say, yeah, I'm going to keep moving downhill, and I'm going to make sure that, we pick up yards whenever we can and try to stay ahead of the sticks.
Roman, I think we've covered a lot here so far in this crossover episode. Now let's put it all together. Let's wrap it up and give game predictions and how we think this game will unfold after another word from one of our sponsors.
Because we've got a message from our good friends over at ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this product, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol pre-alcohol for best results. Make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. You can go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off.
All right, now do we think a low-scoring game is guaranteed? FanDuel says the total is set at 45.5, and with Penn State being roughly a 2-touchdown favorite, you do a little math here, that puts Penn State at about, 31, in the neighborhood of, give or take, 28-14, or, I would say maybe a 30-15, if you will, something in that neighborhood, but that's not really a football score. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 31-17, 28-14, around there. I think it is a low-scoring game. I don't know how Penn State is going to respond to this Ohio State loss, and I think it will take them a half of football. Whereas Washington, look, I think all things equal, Washington is a playoff caliber team. They are a top 12 team in the country if they could have figured it out sooner. But with 4 losses, they're not going to get anywhere. So at this point in time, with a program that is going to be bought into Jedd Fisch, whether they had 1 win to this point, no wins to this point, if they had 7 wins to this point, Roman, I look at this Washington team and I at least know they're going to go to battle for Jedd Fisch regardless of record. And since nothing is really at stake here for Washington outside of, hey, let's just make a bowl, let's get that 6th victory here. They still want to finish on the right foot, finish 8-4, right? Anything short is going to be less of their current expectations. But it's that bull in the China shop mentality, like, let's go mess up Penn State's season, play spoiler, and hand them that second loss in the whiteout. They made us the whiteout game. I combine all those things together. Washington has a really good defense. Steve Belichick is a football savant, especially because we all know who his dad is, and a legendary head coach of the New England Patriots, right? But that's why this is not the correct opponent for Penn State to play at this moment in time. I still think Penn State is built enough to sneak out of this game with a victory, though.
I certainly agree with you there. One thing, though, just complete side note that, this is more for the Locked On Nittany Lions everydayers, because the Locked On Huskies ones, they're tired of me saying this. When Steve Belichick got hired, I'm a huge New England Patriots fan. I freaked out. That was just the best thing ever for me personally. And I was just, oh my God, this is absolutely incredible in every way, shape, and form. So love that. But you're absolutely right in that sense. I would probably be taking the under in this game. I wouldn't be surprised if Washington covers. I know we'll get to game predictions, but when I look at this matchup, one thing that concerns me outside of, some of the obvious, right, where Penn State is still a top 10 team. Penn State is still incredibly talented, very well coached. They've got everything they need to make a run to the playoff, win a game or two in the playoff. So I still worry about those things. One thing that really concerns me, like I said in the opener, Zach, is Washington still has not won a game away from Husky Stadium. Now, let's caveat that a little bit, where not the first game. The first game they absolutely should have won. That was at Lumen Field on a neutral site. Should have found a way to win that game. The first one was a Friday night game, so it's a short week against Rutgers. Is that an excuse? No, but it's something to take into account there. The second two, at Iowa and at Indiana, were both 9 a.m. local time here in Seattle kickoffs. So that's another thing where it felt, and Jedd Fisch had admitted to doing something a little bit different with both of those games in terms of how he prepared the players, when they wanted to get out there, different things like that. So that's something where it's going to be a normal travel schedule for Washington this week. But
yes,
they have had trouble early in games on the road finding ways to play together. I don't know if it's something with the noise. I don't know if it's something with the the long flight, whatever it might be, but they have had a little bit of trouble with that. So I'm really curious to see if this game in this atmosphere is going to be the point in time where they finally say, hey, we figured out how to play together on the road.
Right.
I have my doubts, but at the same point, I think that Jedd Fisch is somebody who can learn from his mistakes and get better and find a way to get his team right for this game.
This crossover episode is going up a little earlier in the week. But I think it's important to get as much information about this game out and about as much as possible for both Washington and Penn State fans. I won't hold you to a score prediction. If you have one right now, Roman, that's honestly awesome. I say Penn State wins 24-17. I think that spread is a little too big, just given all of the circumstances, and Washington is better than they were. At the beginning of the season, this was a team that was built almost in college free agency. Yeah. They needed time to figure it out, like you said. They've been battle tested. They've been travel tested, which is even more important. So this Penn State game isn't going to throw them off traveling across the country once again. They already did it once with Rutgers. What is the difference here? It is the whiteout game, which helps Penn State. But that's why if this was just another any old game, I'd be a little more concerned. I think Penn State needs as much help as they can just to kind of get them through this week. Built some confidence back up against Purdue, but I would not be surprised with a slow start. I say Penn State 24-17. They win this game more so by flexing their muscles in the second half.
Zach, I really like where you're going with that. I agree. I think this spread is a little bit too big. 24-17 is solid. So here's the thing about me. I am the biggest jinx on this planet. So I don't do score predictions.
Okay.
That's just not my thing. But what I will say is I think Washington covers, and I'm going to give you a Locked On Huskies tradition here, and I'm going to give you a bold prediction where it's a fun thing me and my co-host like to do every week, and I like to get really bold here. I like to get really big and just kind of blow it out. So one thing, I've hammered it for a couple weeks now, and I think it's finally going to come true in this game. Give me Denzel Boston 2+ touchdowns. He's led the Big Ten in receiving touchdowns all season long, hasn't scored one since the game at Iowa, and that's going to be almost a month prior by the time Washington gets to Happy Valley. So give me Denzel Boston 2 receiving touchdowns to bring his total up to 11 on the season.
AJ Harris will certainly have his work cut out for him. I think that's another, if you want to look at a instead of a position battle, a head-to-head matchup, AJ Harris versus Denzel Boston is going to be one to watch for the ages, and probably NFL scouts will be looking at that one as well. Roman, before we end this, I actually want to say thank you for just all your nuanced takes of Penn State, because I've seen too many Locked On hosts get away with this, saying that West Virginia is going to beat them and USC is going to beat them, and the Bowling Green game is the reason Penn State's not good, and they never had a chance against Ohio State. You have nuanced, neutral, honest, and honest understanding that Penn State is a college football team that is there. They're close, but they're not quite there just yet. So thank you for being another voice of reason on the network here. And same thing, I hope you can say the same about me, because I have been really a quiet fan of Washington this season. They haven't put it all together yet, but I would have rather faced the Huskies early in the season than right now here as we approach middle of November.
Zach, I absolutely could. And I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. This is always so much fun. I know that, just across this network and this world of college football, I talked about it with, Big Ten expansion as a whole and just conference realignment and all that. And Penn State has always been a program that I've really loved watching. Like, I remember I was a sophomore in college when you guys had that big upset over Ohio State, and I lived with an Ohio State fan at the time. And so I'm sure every Penn State fan knows exactly what I mean when I say that I have never seen him more angry and more just sad than I did in that moment of time. And I got to say, it felt absolutely amazing. So I really look forward to this hopefully becoming more of a tradition with a lot more of these games.
Absolutely. It's the new look Big Ten, and that's going to do it for another Locked On crossover. He is Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies. I'm Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. Be sure to subscribe to both channels to keep up with Penn State and Washington, and we'll see you throughout the week as we talk more in depth about this game.